Ladies and gentlemen, my name's Paul, and in this RedGamingTech.com video, we're going to be discussing as well as analysing tech news which, as usual, has popped up in the past 24 or so hours. Hopefully, you're having an amazing day. We have lots of stuff to get through in this video. I'd like to begin, though, with AMD and their 25x20 goal. And the company have absolutely decimated this goal with an impressive 32 times, not the original 25. And you may say, well, what the hell am I even talking about? And, well, I'll grant you that this is a pretty weird introduction to a video, but it was a goal that AMD set out to break in 2014, so 6 years ago now, and it's all to do with energy efficiency of mobile processors. So, back in 2014, they had set the goal of 25 times the energy efficiency by this year. And, well, as I kind of spoiled a few moments ago, they didn't hit 25 times the energy efficiency. Instead, they hit 31.7. I'm going to call it 32 for the rest of this video. They've also stated, of course, that they've achieved leadership performance for laptop PCs, greater energy efficiency, and naturally this does bring several improvements to the lives of users. Yes, it's great for the environment, but it also means that battery life can be better. You also can have a smaller portable form factor because, let's face it, it's not exactly ideal to have a laptop which weighs, a small elephant. And furthermore, you also have better performance in general, and so on and so on. So, just a quick recap, AMD achieved the 25x20 goal by delivering leadership CPU and GPU architectures. This is, by the way, of course, their words in a press statement that was emailed to me, including multiple generations of award-winning Zen architecture, innovation in real-time power management, continued evolution of the Infinity Fabric, silicon-level power optimization, and rapid adoption of the cutting-edge process. This is, of course, really encapsulating a lot of the stuff that AMD have been working on, and also why AMD have been able to deliver solutions for consoles as well. Because consoles, they can't just have unlimited power budgets. It's kind of one of those things not a ton of people realize, but Sony, Microsoft, Nintendo, and so on kind of need to self-regulate to a degree of how much power the consoles can take in different situations. For example, they need to hit energy efficiency targets, ideally. Let's say if you're, watching a YouTube video or watching a movie on Blu-ray or whatever. And all of those things really are kind of in an effort to make the world, a more energy efficient place. This is actually something I want to kind of get into more in a separate video, but I wanted to just highlight this for a moment because it's going to be a foundational point for another video that I'm going to be making in the future, which I'm actually pretty happy with how it's coming on. Anyway, getting back to this, energy efficiency, I know is not as exciting perhaps, especially in the desktop side of the equation, as extra processor cores or hitting a certain clock frequency or IPC gains. But then again, energy efficiency is also very important for laptops. And I will admit I'm someone that doesn't necessarily care about energy efficiency that much in desktop solutions. I'm not that fast. But in laptops, I really do feel that it's an important, imperative goal. And naturally, some of the things we've seen here, not only in terms of the architecture of Zen, but the Zen 2 architecture's ability to adjust its frequency so fast. Obviously, we've talked about Smart Shift multiple times, which is obviously also imperative for upcoming laptop solutions as well. And also when it comes to silicon-level power optimizations, a lot of this stuff will also be brought into RDNA 2, which is one of the reasons that RDNA 1 was so much more efficient, performance per watt increase of around 50% over the Vega architecture, but that jump is going to be similar for RDNA 2. So I think AMD have done extremely well here. And from AMD, we're going to move over to Intel and Rocket Lake S. We've discussed Rocket Lake several times on the channel recently, but there is a very interesting benchmark which has popped up on Geekbench. And this was discovered by Tim Apisak, so full credit to him. Of course, we'll link his profile in the video description, as well as the Geekbench result. And this is still almost certainly a quite early engineering sample. I'm hearing that the clock frequency of this particular architecture, we'll get into that in just a second, could possibly hit almost 5 GHz. But of course, Geekbench could also be reading this incorrectly, and so on and so on. Either way though, there is something rather fascinating here, and it comes down to the cache. You can cache it if you can. I'm going to give you a second to recover from the terrible pun as well. Anyway, you'll notice that level 1 instruction and level 1 data cache is listed, as well as level 2 cache and level 3 cache. Obviously level 3 cache being, well, basically for the entire processor, whereas level 1 cache, for example, is private for that specific core. And there is something very interesting here, and that comes down to the amount of cache which can be found on the data cache, and that is 48 kilobytes. Now, the reason that that's so interesting is because if you compare that to the level 1 cache on Skylake, for example, I don't know, like a 9900K, you have 16 megabytes of cache for the level 3. 9900K, of course, is 8 cores, 16 threads, which is the same as this sample is reporting. 256 kilobytes of cache per core, so that's different, that's double here. And we also have 32 kilobytes for both data and another 32 kilobytes for instruction cache. Whereas here, well, yeah, I'll go over it one more time. Instruction cache is identical to the 9900K, but level 1 data cache is 48 kilobytes, and the level 2 cache is doubled. So this is more likely to be something that you would see in Sunny Cove, which is, of course, kind of the ongoing rumour. I first released a video last year that, according to a source that wrote to me, Intel were essentially doing kind of a backport. Now, naturally, it's not possible to do an exact backport from a 10 to a 14 nm process. But what they can do is basically change the architecture as necessary. The rumour has it that the iGPU, for example, is having a significant cut, and Moore's Law is Dead has also gone more extensively into some of the leaks which he's received. But ultimately, this particular processor could be quite interesting. From what I can ascertain, it's not exactly Sunny Cove, but it's not quite Willow Cove either. And it seems to be some kind of hybrid design, with some cuts being required simply because of the 14 nm process. And allegedly it only will go up to 8 cores. This has been quite an ongoing theme. The good news is, though, if you do purchase a 10th gen processor, for example a 10900K, you can, at least with some motherboards, a couple of motherboards I've got do list this, plonk in a future processor, which is obviously going to be this. Will it be good enough to take on Zen 3? There you go. That's a $64,000 question, isn't it? At the moment, I'm thinking AMD will probably win in multi-thread performance, but I think Intel will have some advantages, especially when it comes down to the single-core performance, and probably will retain the gaming crown. With that said, I do think that the 4000 series of Ryzen will most likely be considerably faster than, let's say, a 9900K in terms of the architecture. With the 10900K, it might be a bit tighter because of the clock frequency advantage, but ultimately it's just going to be very interesting to see how all of this plays out. And now we're going to mosey our way to the PlayStation. And this is very interesting because there has been a recent interview with US Gamer. Of course, I'll link that in the video description as well, with Anshar Studios. They are working on Observer System Redux, which is an enhanced port, and rather interestingly, they've basically mentioned that on the PlayStation 5, ray tracing and haptic feedbacks require more research and development and takes longer to take full advantage of compared to something easier like the loading. Now, I do believe that this is going to be the case. I mean, we've seen this with the PC as well, with hardware-based ray tracing. NVIDIA said that RTX essentially just works, and I think that eventually it will be a lot easier to incorporate into game engines. Like UE5, for example, has an awful lot of, let's say, groundwork which is laid out for a hardware-based ray tracing, but of course also their own software solutions as well, such as Lumen. You should actually look out for another video that I'll be covering soon on that. But long story short, that is going to take long to take full advantage of. Hardware-based ray tracing on the next-gen consoles is something that developers will need to get used to eventually, but it's going to take them a while to fully leverage. But obviously, when it comes down to like loading screens, it's just better known. And I do think it will also really depend on several factors. A, what is the game engine? B, what platforms are developers used to using? And C, what about workflows, target platforms, and so on. For example, if a developer for the last year or what have you has been working on, I don't know, PC versions of games which have hardware-based ray tracing, or they have some familiarity there, it's probably going to be a bit simpler to incorporate. But you have to remember that RDNA 2, which is the basis of both next-gen consoles in terms of its hardware ray tracing support, is also a little different to RTX. With that said, though, I do think that we're going to see some very interesting things with ray tracing in the next gen, but I do agree that it's certainly going to be a bit harder to fully leverage. And from PlayStation, Intel, AMD, might as well talk about Xbox. Nice way to round out the video. Especially as I always like to do things alphabetically. And this is from The Verge, once again linked in the video description. And Tom Warren has also taken to Twitter as well. And now we have some information regarding what Lockhart is. To be honest with you, most of this stuff is just reinforcing rumours that we've heard a plethora of times now. Essentially, Lockhart seems to be a console which has 7.5 gigabytes of usable memory. That is memory that's available for games. Just to clarify, that's not 7.5 gigabytes total on board. That is 7.5 gigabytes which is reserved for games. The clock frequency of the CPU is also running slower, although an exact clock frequency was not disclosed. We have seen reports of Lockhart hitting 3200 MHz to 3400 MHz with its clock frequency. We don't know whether it supports SMT enabled or disabled, and allegedly the GPU is around 4 T-flops of performance. See right there, that word around is very interesting, because that could be 3.7, 3.8, that could be 4.2. It's a very, well, it's wishy-washy language, I guess. But then again, I don't think it's going to be like a massive disparity. It's not like, you know, it's going to be like 4.7 and they're calling it around 4 T-flops. So we can say it's around 4.1, 4.2 at best. They've also said that the system will be targeting both 1080 and 1440p, which of course is contrary to what Microsoft are doing with the Xbox Series X, which will be targeting 4K. Of course, this is all going to be down to games developers, and this is part of a much larger conversation, to be honest with you, that we can have, but really it comes down to what developers are going to want to do, and then it becomes sticking points like, what about upsampling and that type of thing. Ultimately, the next generation is also kind of weird, because by the time a lot of developers even get briefed that here are the specs of the console, there's only usually like a year-ish for them to work on ports or what have you. So it becomes kind of difficult. This is one of the reasons I can't remember who was discussing this. It was a former employee of Rockstar, and they actually came out and said that one of the reasons we're seeing GTA 5 remaster again is because it's easier to create a game of the scope of GTA 5 and just remaster it, rather than essentially crafting an entire new experience with, well, let's face it, people would want all of the bells and the trimmings for next gen. And they can't do that by the time the console launches. I suspect that GTA 6 is being worked on, but it would take, well, a long time for them to become familiar with the console. But furthermore, it would also take time for them to be able to, well, craft a world that we would expect. Now, my personal opinion, Lockhart will be more than enough to do 1080p. I don't think it's going to be that difficult to downgrade a game for Lockhart. Not only because you've got things like lower quality resolution, but remember, when you have lower resolution targets, let's say 1080p, it also means that you need less geometry as well, because otherwise you're going to start putting geometry in basically sub-pixel regions of the screen. In other words, if you have like 500 triangles, and yes, I'm being really silly here, but if you have like 500 triangles per pixel, that's a bit much. So really you want to try and do like almost a one-to-one there with, and you can basically reduce the quality of geometry, check textures, and whatever else you need to do. That should theoretically mean that the GPU gets less work when it comes to geometry and general like drawing of stuff on screen, but it also means that features like hardware-based ray tracing will also not need to be so, well, hard hit. Because obviously if you're rendering the game, let's say at 1080p, oftentimes I think one of the techniques we're going to see with next gen is to calculate ray tracing effects with, well, basically lower resolution internally. We've seen that already kind of hinted with the PlayStation 5, and I think Xbox is going to do similar, because ultimately there is only a finite amount of GPU resources that these consoles have. So to use them smartly is just the way to go. And this is going to become more, well, optimized, let's say, as the gen continues. With all of that said though, hopefully you've enjoyed the video. Normal stuff, like, share, comment and subscribe, and I'll see you soon. Take care of yourselves. Bye for now.